The clock above the academy chapel was ringing 7 when I signed my name on the wrong line of the wrong form and saved my own future by looking like an idiot. The form was pale yellow, creased at the corner, and stamped session transfer request in red ink so faded it looked more like a bruise than a warning. I stood at the counter of the examination office with my hair still damp from a hurried shower, my blazer buttoned crooked, and my old life pressing against the back of my throat like swallowed glass. Behind me, the courtyard was filling with candidates for the National Cadet Selection Exam, all of them dressed in Navy uniforms, all of them clutching admission cards, all of them pretending not to be terrified. In my first life, I had stood among them with a perfect bun, polished shoes, and blind faith in the morning plan that our class monitor, Vivian Sloan, had printed and distributed like scripture. Meet at the East Gate by 7:40. Travel together. Line up by class rank. Do not separate.
Trust the group.
That plan had sounded responsible. That plan had killed my chance, ruined my name, and turned my whole cohort into a cautionary story whispered to younger students whenever teachers wanted to explain how arrogance could become disaster. So when the clerk blinked at me and asked if I understood that changing to the afternoon session meant giving up my assigned morning cue, I smiled with the calmest face I owned and said, "Yes. Please move me." The woman behind the counter frowned as if I had asked to sit the exam underwater. Her name badge read Emrys Alcott, and in my first life, she had been the one who locked the glass door at 8:05 while my classmates screamed on the other side of the gate. I remembered her hands more than her face. Thin fingers, silver wedding ring, one nail painted a different shade because she had repaired it in a rush. Those hands had turned the latch while Vivian shouted that we were Crownbridge Academy's top cohort and deserved special consideration. Those hands had held the line when the rest of us begged. Those hands had saved the integrity of the exam and buried 200 futures under the same phrase, "Late arrival, no entry." Now those same fingers hovered above the keyboard, waiting for me to change my mind. "Miss Vale," she said, "your morning session placement is confirmed. It is highly unusual to transfer without medical cause, family emergency, or transport conflict. The afternoon session is for overflow candidates and verified reschedules. You understand that if you change, you cannot come back to the morning group." I looked through the glass wall at Vivian crossing the courtyard like she owned the weather, a white folder pressed to her chest, a silver whistle hanging from her neck even though no teacher had given her authority to carry one. She was already gathering people around her, already smiling, already beginning the performance that once convinced me obedience was safety. "I understand," I said, and watched Mrs. Alcott stamp approved beside my name. The sound of that stamp was not loud, but it rearranged my bones. In my first life, I had died at 24 in a rented room above a laundromat, not from poison or murder or any dramatic villain's hand, but from the slow suffocation of a life redirected by one missed exam. After the gate closed, my parents stopped saying my name with pride. The scholarship committee marked me ineligible. The academy blamed the entire cohort for negligence, then quietly let Vivian transfer abroad with a recommendation letter that blamed collective confusion instead of her deliberate sabotage. She became a policy consultant. I became the girl who did not enter the hall. Years later, I found the truth in a leaked administrative memo. The morning gate had been changed after a security drill. The east entrance was never meant for candidates, and Vivian had known because her uncle sat on the logistics committee. She had led us there anyway because she planned to arrive late with us, trigger mass sympathy, and force an exemption that would erase her own forged practice records in the confusion. Instead, the exam board refused everyone. She escaped because she had never signed the group attendance sheet. I had signed it first. I was blamed as the deputy organizer. When I woke again in my dormitory that morning with the chapel clock ringing 6 and Vivian's plan folded under my pillow, I did not pray. I did not cry. I put on my uniform, walked straight to the office, and became the first student in academy history to run away from the perfect morning session. Mrs. Alcott printed my new card on stiff, white paper, while the old one lay on the counter between us like a dead version of me. Morning session, Gate E, Row 3, check-in 7:50. The new card slid warm from the printer. Afternoon session. Gate C, row 11. Check IN 1240. It looked unimpressive. No gold rank stripe, no priority queue, no academy cohort label, only plain black text and a barcode that belonged to me alone. I loved it immediately. The clerk tore the old card in half, then paused. "Do you want a receipt of the change?" "Yes," I said, because paper trails had teeth if you knew when to feed them. She printed a second page showing the time of transfer, the terminal number, and her own staff ID. I folded both documents, tucked them into the inside pocket of my blazer, and turned toward the door just as Vivian entered the office with 6 classmates orbiting around her. Her smile landed on me before her eyes did. It was a perfect smile, the sort teachers described as leadership and girls in the dorm described as exhausting. "Livia," she said, sweet enough to rot fruit. "There you are. We were looking for you. Why are you here?" I held up my new card for half a second, not long enough for her to read the details, just long enough to make her curious. "Fixing a mistake." Her gaze sharpened. "What mistake?" I slipped the card away.
"Me."
That answer irritated her more than an insult would have. Vivian depended on confession. She liked people explaining themselves because explanations gave her handles to pull. In our class, she collected weaknesses the way other girls collected lip gloss. Mara feared disappointing her father, Tess hated confrontation, Anika needed scholarship points, and I, in my first life, had wanted so badly to be included that I mistook being useful for being loved. Vivian had used that hunger perfectly. She let me help print the morning plan, let me distribute it, let my name sit beneath hers as assistant organizer, then cut herself loose when the consequences arrived. This time, I watched her glance at the counter, at Mrs. Alcott, at the shred bin holding the torn pieces of my old card. "You didn't change something, did you?" she asked softly. The 6 girls behind her went still. I smiled, not warmly. "You told us to arrive as a group, Vivian." I realized I'm not good in groups. One of the girls, Paige, laughed before she could stop herself. Vivian did not. She stepped closer, lowering her voice as if kindness required privacy. "Today is not the day for your little independent streak. If you separate from the cohort and miss instructions, nobody can protect you." That was the exact sentence she had used in my first life when I hesitated at the bus stop and wondered why our plan contradicted the printed exam bulletin. Nobody can protect you. Back then, it frightened me. Now, it sounded like a confession. I left before she could ask Mrs. Alcott anything useful. The courtyard had become a theater of nerves. Students checked their admission cards again and again. Teachers shouted last-minute reminders. Parents pressed breakfast buns into unwilling hands, and the academy gates gleamed in the pale morning light like polished traps. Vivian's printed plan was everywhere. I saw it folded into blazer pockets, taped to water bottles, held between trembling fingers. It had her crest at the top, her initials at the bottom, and one false instruction tucked so neatly among true ones that nobody would notice unless they had died for it before. All Crownbridge candidates must enter through East Gate for morning verification. The real bulletin, sent by the exam board after midnight, said Crownbridge candidates assigned to the morning session had been moved to Gate C because of a security drill near the East Service Road. Vivian knew. She had received the updated bulletin through her uncle before anyone else. She also knew our academy email server had delayed the message. That delay was her opportunity. If the cohort followed her plan, they would gather at the wrong gate, wait through the check-in window, and arrive at Gate C too late. If she could claim we had all relied on academy-distributed guidance, she might force a resit or bury her own eligibility fraud inside a mass appeal. It was clever in the ugliest way. It required every one of us to trust her more than the official exam board. In my first life, we did. This time, I walked past the crowd and sat on the stone bench beneath the chapel window, exactly where the morning group could see me doing nothing. That was important. If I vanished too cleanly, Vivian would become suspicious too early. If I stayed where she could watch me, she would mistake my stillness for panic. I took out a banana from my bag, peeled it slowly, and read the afternoon candidate guidelines while her followers whispered. I could feel their eyes stabbing my shoulders. I could hear fragments. Is she not coming? Did she get sick? She always does weird things before exams. Vivian said no one should split up. Their doubt moved like smoke, but not enough to become fire. Vivian knew how to smother doubt before it spread. At 7:31, she climbed onto the low wall beside the fountain and blew her ridiculous whistle. The sound cut through the courtyard, bright and commanding. Crownbridge morning candidates, gather here. East Gate route in 9 minutes. Keep your admission cards visible. Do not wander. Do not follow unofficial rumors. We move as one. A cheer rose, nervous and relieved. People liked being told fear had a shape. They liked believing someone else had mapped the maze. Vivian looked at me over the heads of our classmates. "Livia," she called, loud enough for everyone. "Last chance to be sensible." I raised my banana in a lazy salute. The crowd laughed. She smiled for them, but her eyes went flat. At 7:40, she led them away. Almost the entire cohort followed. Rows of navy blazers, polished shoes, water bottles, sharpened pencils, and misplaced faith moving toward East Gate like a parade marching into fog. I watched them pass beneath the plane trees and felt no triumph, not yet. Some of those students had mocked me in my first life after the disaster, eager to place blame somewhere other than their own obedience. Some had signed statements saying I helped Vivian enforce the plan. Some had known the truth later and stayed silent because silence protected their appeals. But not all of them were cruel. Some were simply scared. Some were children trained to follow rank. Revenge sounds clean when you imagine it from the bottom of a grave. In daylight, with real faces walking toward consequences, it tastes more complicated. For one heartbeat, I almost stood up and shouted that Gate E was wrong. Then I remembered myself at 24, counting coins for rent while Vivian gave a televised interview about resilience. I remembered my father deleting my exam photo from the family wall. I remembered Mrs. Alcott's memo, the one that proved Vivian had used us as insulation. I stayed seated. Mercy was not the same as volunteering to drown again. The first message arrived at 7:52. It came from Tess, who had sat beside me in mathematics for 2 years and borrowed my highlighters without asking. "Where are you?" "We're at Eastgate." "Security says wait." I looked at the message until the screen dimmed, then put my phone face down. The second came from Paige at 7:56. "V says don't panic. Gate C people are overflow." The third came from Anika. "Do you know why my card says Gate C?" Vivian says old cards didn't update. That one made my stomach twist. Anika had never hurt me deliberately. In my first life, she had cried outside the gate until she vomited from stress. Later, she signed a statement blaming me because her scholarship sponsor demanded a name. I opened her message, typed 3 words, and stopped. "Check official bulletin." That would save her if she moved immediately, but it would also alert Vivian before the trap closed. My thumb hovered. Then another message flashed in the class group chat from Vivian herself. "Ignore confusion. Eastgate supervisor confirming batch entry. Anyone who leaves now risks being marked absent." There was the lie in writing. I screenshotted it. Then I texted Anika privately. "Read the board email yourself." Not Vivian's plan. I did not know if she would listen. I had learned not to confuse warning someone with carrying them. At 8:01, the chapel bell rang once. Morning check-in at Gate C had 4 minutes left. From where I sat, I could not see East Gate, but I could imagine it too well. The service road blocked by orange cones, the security guard with his clipboard, Vivian's voice turning sharper as reality resisted her. In my first life, she had kept us there until 8:03 by claiming she saw an examiner coming. At 8:04, she began walking fast toward Gate C. At 8:05, the door closed while we were still 20 meters away. The memory was so vivid that my body reacted before the present caught up. My palms went damp, my pulse kicked, and for 1 second I smelled hot metal and panic. Then my phone exploded with notifications. They said wrong gate. Run. Move now. Gate C closing. Why did she say east? Livia, where are you? I did not move. Not because I was cold, but because the exam board had cameras and cameras loved movement. If anyone later claimed I guided them, misled them, or participated in the morning plan, the footage would show me on the chapel bench, alone, eating breakfast, with an afternoon card in my pocket. At 8:05 exactly, the messages changed shape. No more instructions. No more questions. Only anger. They locked it. We're outside. They won't open. Vivian is talking to the supervisor. Someone call Principal Hargrove. The strangest thing about consequences is how quiet they are at first. I expected screaming to carry across the campus, but the courtyard remained almost peaceful. Pigeons hopped near the fountain. A teacher hurried past carrying a stack of folders. Somewhere in the art building, a window opened with a squeal. The world did not pause because 100 students had followed the wrong girl to the wrong gate. That indifference felt cruel in my first life. This time, it felt like justice had excellent posture. At 8:12, Principal Hargrove strode across the courtyard toward East Gate with 2 deputy heads behind him. He was red-faced, still buttoning his suit jacket, his phone pressed to his ear. I slipped off the bench and followed at a distance, not close enough to be involved, close enough to witness. The scene outside Gate C was almost identical to my nightmares, except I was standing on the safe side of memory. Students crowded against the barrier, some crying, some shouting, some holding admission cards up like offerings. Mrs. Alcott stood behind the glass with 2 exam supervisors, her face pale but firm. The door was locked. A printed sign had been taped inside. Morning session check-in closed at 8:05. No late entry. Vivian stood at the front in her immaculate blazer, still performing leadership even while the stage collapsed beneath her. This is an institutional error, she insisted. We were directed to East Gate as a cohort. The supervisor asked, directed by whom? And for the first time that morning, her smile faltered. I saw the moment she looked for me. Her head turned sharply, scanning the crowd outside the glass, expecting to find me trapped among them where I belonged. In my first life, that was when she grabbed my wrist and hissed, "Say you helped confirm it. If we all stand together, they can't punish us." I had been too frightened to understand that she was not asking for solidarity. She was throwing me into the hole first. This time, her eyes found me behind Principal Hargrove, standing under the awning with my hands folded around my phone. Something ugly flashed across her face. Not fear, not exactly. Recognition. She knew I had stepped off the board before she moved the pieces. "Livia," she called, suddenly sweet. "Tell them. You saw the plan. You know we were all told East Gate." The crowd turned toward me. 100 wet, furious, desperate faces. The old me would have folded under that weight. The new me took one step forward and said, "I saw your plan, Vivian. That's why I changed sessions." Silence fell so sharply that even the rain seemed to hesitate. Principal Hargrove stared at me. Mrs. Alcott, behind the glass, looked down at her terminal. Vivian laughed once, too high. "Changed sessions? That's not allowed." I pulled out my afternoon card and the transfer receipt. It is if you do it officially before check-in. The receipt passed from my hand to Principal Hargrove's, then to the exam supervisor through the security slot. Vivian watched it travel like a snake watching a candle. Around us, the cohort began to realize something worse than missing the gate. Not everyone had missed it. Not everyone had trusted her. Not everyone could be folded into the mass victim story she had prepared. "Why didn't you tell us?" Paige demanded, tears cutting through her foundation. I looked at her, and for a second I saw the girl from my first life who had told the disciplinary board I insisted the East Gate was correct. "Because I was not your organizer," I said. "Vivian was." That answer landed exactly where it needed to. Students turned back to Vivian, and the crowd's desperation began changing direction. She sensed it and lifted her chin. "This is absurd. Livia has always resented me. She probably changed sessions to make us look bad." "I changed sessions at 7:08, I said. "Your group message telling everyone to ignore the official bulletin went out at 7:56. I held up my phone. I saved it. Pattern interruption, my old literature teacher used to call it. The moment a story breaks its expected rhythm and the audience wakes up. Vivian's story had been a tragedy of group confusion. Mine introduced a villain with timestamps. The exam supervisor did not argue in the rain. Adults rarely do when paperwork is available. She asked Principal Hargrove to bring Vivian, me, and the class representatives into the side office beside Gate C. The rest of the cohort stayed outside, pressed against the glass, their morning exam dead behind the locked door. The side office smelled of damp wool, printer toner, and the mint gum Mrs. Alcott chewed when stressed. Vivian sat opposite me at a narrow table, hands folded, expression composed again. That was her gift. Give her 30 seconds, and she could rebuild innocence from ashes. I circulated the plan based on the information available to students, she said before anyone asked. If Livia had updated information, she had an ethical obligation to share it with the cohort. It was a brilliant pivot. Make my survival sound like betrayal. I almost admired the speed of it. Almost. The supervisor turned to me. Did you receive information not available to other candidates? No, I said. I read the official board email. The email sent at 12:17 a.m.? Yes. Vivian cut in. Most students did not receive that email until after 8 because of the academy server delay. The supervisor looked at her. How do you know that? The room cooled. Vivian blinked once. Her mouth opened, but nothing useful came out. In my first life, that tiny mistake never happened because no one asked the right question. Everyone had been too busy begging for entry, then blaming the nearest soft target. But now we were inside a quiet office with a supervisor trained to smell procedural rot. Miss Sloan, the woman said, you stated outside that you were directed to East Gate as a cohort. Directed by whom? Vivian recovered. By the printed plan we prepared from prior instructions. Who prepared it? The class committee. Names. Her eyes flicked to me. There it was. The old blade. She wanted my name beside hers again. I leaned back and waited. I drafted the route, she said carefully, but Livia reviewed earlier versions. Earlier versions are not the final version, I said. And I did not approve anything instructing students to ignore official updates. Principal Hargrove rubbed his forehead. He wanted this to become a misunderstanding, a weather problem, a locked gate tragedy with no culprit. Schools loved collective accidents because collective accidents did not require firing favorites. But the supervisor was not his employee. She requested Vivian's phone. Vivian hesitated one breath too long. My battery is low. Mrs. Alcott plugged a charger into the wall without changing expression. We have power. I nearly smiled. Vivian handed over her phone as if donating it to charity. The supervisor did not scroll through private messages. She asked Vivian to open the class group chat and the logistics committee thread she had referenced. Vivian claimed she had no committee access. Then Mrs. Alcott printed the message logs submitted automatically through the academy portal when Vivian uploaded her Crownbridge morning plan. I had forgotten about that feature because in my first life, no one investigated until after the logs were overwritten. This time, the supervisor moved fast. The upload record showed Vivian posted the plan at 6:42 a.m., nearly 6.5 hours after the official board email changed the gate. More importantly, an attachment preview showed she had deleted one line from the board notice before reposting it to the class. Crownbridge morning candidates must enter through Gate C due to East Service Road closure. In its place, she inserted her own instruction. All Crownbridge candidates must enter through East Gate for morning verification. Mrs. Alcott read the two versions aloud. The room became so silent that the charger buzzing in the wall sounded like an insect trapped in a jar. Vivian's face did not collapse. That would have been too honest. Instead, it hardened into something polished and dangerous. A formatting error, she said. A formatting error that changed the gate? The supervisor asked. For a few seconds, I thought she might still escape. Vivian had escaped worse in my first life because adults were often more afraid of scandal than injustice. Principal Hargrove began muttering about stress, miscommunication, high-pressure environments. He looked at me as if I were a match held too close to dry curtains. Perhaps, he said, Miss Vale's decision to transfer sessions created unnecessary confusion as well. Students may have heard rumors. No, Mrs. Alcott said. It was the first time she interrupted him. She placed my transfer receipt on the table and tapped the timestamp. Miss Vale changed sessions before Miss Sloane circulated the final plan. She did not send instructions to anyone. She did not represent herself as an organizer. Her transfer is clean.
Clean.
The word almost made me dizzy. In my first life, nothing about me had been clean after that day. My record, my name, my family's tone, the way teachers looked through me. Clean was something other girls got to be. Vivian heard it too, and for the first time her composure cracked. So, she gets rewarded for abandoning us? She snapped. She knew something was wrong and saved herself. I looked at her calmly. Yes. The answer startled everyone, including me. I saved myself. The supervisor dismissed me from the room after taking my statement. I stepped back into the corridor and found half the cohort waiting like a storm held behind skin. News had already leaked, it always did. Anika stood near the vending machine, pale and shaking, but she was holding a Gate C entry slip. She had listened. She had run. Her hair was coming loose from its braid, and her chest rose fast as if she had only just stopped sprinting. I made it, she whispered when she saw me. Barely. They let me in at 8:04. Relief hit me harder than revenge. One person had checked. One person had chosen herself over the group spell.
Good, I said.
She swallowed.
I'm sorry.
For last time. The words were impossible, of course.
She did not know about last time.
Not really. But something in her face made me think souls remember the weight of things minds cannot. I nodded once. Then don't sign anything false this time. Her eyes filled. She nodded back. Behind her, Paige glared at me with ruined mascara and a fury that needed somewhere to live. You could have saved all of us. No, I said. All of you could have read your own admission cards. It was crueler than I meant it to sound, and more necessary than kindness. The morning dragged itself forward like a wounded animal. The exam began without the locked-out cohort. Through the corridor window, I saw candidates bent over desks in the hall, pencils moving, futures still alive. Outside, parents gathered at the gates as rumors spread. Wrong entrance, forged plan, class monitor under investigation, morning session lost. Some students called their families sobbing. Others attacked Vivian in the group chat until the administrators froze it. Principal Hargrove moved between offices with the frantic dignity of a man watching his school's ranking catch fire. I stayed in the library, far from the crowd, and reviewed my afternoon materials. That was the strangest part of revenge. After the trap snapped shut, I still had an exam to pass. Justice did not fill answer sheets. Vindication did not solve logic problems or essay prompts. In my first life, I had spent years imagining the moment Vivian would be exposed, as if exposure itself would hand me back everything. But sitting under the library's green lamps, I understood that the real gift of my second life was not watching her fall. It was the quiet hour afterward, when no one owned my time, no one pulled me into a herd, and my future depended on my own hands again. I opened my notebook and studied. At 11:30, Vivian found me between the history shelves. I knew she would. People like her could not bear a room where someone else was breathing calmly. She walked in without her whistle, without her folder, without the orbit of admirers that usually made her look taller. Her face was pale, but her lipstick remained perfect.
You planned this, she said. No greeting. No mask.
Just accusation. Sharp and almost refreshing. I closed my notebook. You planned it first. I tried to protect the cohort. You deleted the correct gate, because the morning plan needed consistency. That answer was so absurd I laughed. A small laugh, nothing theatrical, but it struck her like a slap. Consistency? I said. You mean control? She stepped closer. Do you think you've won because you have an afternoon card? The cohort will hate you. Their parents will hate you. Hargrove will not forgive the student who made Crown Bridge look incompetent. In my first life, that threat would have hollowed me out. This time, I looked at the shelf beside her, at a row of old civic ethics textbooks nobody had borrowed in years, and felt almost peaceful. Maybe, I said, but the exam board will know I followed procedure. Her nostrils flared. Procedure will not make people like you. Neither did obedience. For one breath, the library lights flickered. It was just old wiring, but it felt like the universe blinking. Vivian lowered her voice. Withdraw your statement. Say, you misunderstood. Say you panicked and moved sessions because you thought Eastgate was crowded. If you do that, I can still frame this as a shared communication failure. The board might grant a resit. There it was. Not an apology, not fear for the cohort, but a negotiation built around her own survival. And if I don't, I asked, then everyone will know you watched your classmates miss the exam and did nothing. Everyone already knows you led them to the wrong gate. Her hands curled. I can ruin you socially. I reopen my notebook. You already did. It didn't last. She stared at me, confused by a sentence that belonged to another life. Then the door opened behind her, and Mrs. Alcott stepped in with 2 security staff. Miss Sloane, she said, the exam board requires you back in the office. Vivian turned, startled. Why? Mrs. Alcott's expression was unreadable. Your uncle's logistics account accessed the gate change notice at 12:21 a.m. and forwarded it to your personal email. Pattern interruption again. The villain thought the story was about a deleted line. The next page had a family signature. By noon, the academy had split into factions. Some students blamed Vivian. Some blamed me. Some blamed the exam board, the server, the weather, the cruelty of gates, anything except the simple fact that they had followed a peer instead of official instructions. Parents arrived with umbrellas and outrage. Teachers whispered in corners. The locked-out cohort was escorted to the auditorium, not for a resit, but for individual statements. That was where Vivian's plan truly died. A mass appeal required a single story. Individual statements produced fractures. Tess admitted she had seen her own card say Gate C, but followed Vivian because everyone important was going east. Paige admitted Vivian told them not to open the midnight email because it was a duplicate. Mara produced a voice message where Vivian said, if we all arrive together, they can't reject all of us. Anika, hands shaking, submitted my private text telling her to read the board email herself, which proved I had not hoarded secret information. I had pointed at the official source. By 12:18, the exam board issued its interim decision. No late entry, no emergency resit, investigation into deliberate misdirection. Afternoon candidates unaffected. I read the notice twice. Afternoon candidates unaffected. For words, plain as bread, beautiful as a door opening. At 12:40, I stood at Gate C for afternoon check-in with my new card in my hand. The morning crowd had thinned, but their resentment lingered in the air like smoke. A few students from other schools watched me with curiosity, having heard pieces of the scandal. I ignored them. My hands were steady until Mrs. Alcott scanned my barcode. The machine beeped green.
Such a small sound.
A machine agreeing that I existed. A machine opening the gate that had once closed in my face. Mrs. Alcott handed back my card and said quietly, "Good luck, Miss Vale." In my first life, I hated her for locking the door. It had taken years to understand she had not locked me out. She had protected the exam from the consequences of our obedience. "Thank you," I said and meant it. I walked through the gate into the examination corridor. The afternoon hall was smaller than the morning hall, less impressive, with sunlight falling across the back row and a clock that ticked too loudly. My assigned seat was row 11, desk 6. No one I knew sat beside me. No class monitor watched my movements. No cohort plan rustled in anyone's pocket. For the first time in 2 lives, I sat an exam as one person. The paper itself was brutal. That almost made me laugh. After all the drama, all the plotting, all the locked gates and deleted instructions and family account evidence, the exam did not reward me for being reborn. It asked about constitutional principles, statistical reasoning, ethical governance, and a case study involving disaster logistics that felt like the exam board had developed a sense of humor. Halfway through the first section, my mind flashed to the auditorium where my cohort was likely still giving statements. I could almost hear Vivian insisting she had acted under pressure, Principal Hargrove begging for discretion, parents demanding special treatment. Then I looked down at the question in front of me. When individuals rely on unofficial leadership despite contradictory official instructions, where should accountability rest? I pressed my lips together to stop myself from smiling and began writing. My answer was not poetic. It did not mention betrayal, rebirth, or the taste of fear outside a locked gate. It said accountability rests with the person who knowingly distributes false guidance, the institution that fails to communicate clearly, and the individuals who ignore primary sources when stakes are high. It was the most honest answer I had ever given. When the final bell rang at 3:30, I put down my pen and felt something loosen behind my ribs. Not joy exactly. Joy was too loud for that room. It was release, quiet and almost frightening. The invigilator collected my paper. My fingers let it go without clinging. In my first life, I never reached that moment. I never wrote the final essay, never sealed the booklet, never walked out with the exhausted dignity of someone who had at least been allowed to try. Outside the hall, the afternoon candidates spilled into the corridor comparing answers, groaning, laughing, pretending they had not been terrified. I walked alone to the courtyard. The rain had stopped. The stones shone dark and clean. Near the auditorium steps, the locked-out cohort waited with their parents, faces swollen from crying or anger. Vivian stood apart from them with Principal Hargrove and 2 exam officials. Her uncle was there too, a tall man in an expensive coat, speaking rapidly until one of the officials held up a tablet and showed him something that made his mouth close. Vivian saw me. For once, she did not call my name. The official decision arrived Friday morning, though the rumors beat it by a full day. The morning cohort's missed entry stood. Students who could prove they attempted Gate C before closure remained eligible for future sittings, but received no special resit. Students who knowingly circulated or reinforced false instructions were referred for disciplinary review. Vivian Sloan was suspended pending expulsion proceedings, her leadership commendation revoked, her recommendation letters frozen, and her family connection to the logistics committee referred to the board's integrity unit. Principal Hargrove resigned to preserve institutional trust, which was administrator language for being pushed out before lunch. Anika kept her score because she made the gate. I received mine 3 weeks later. High enough for the National Cadet College, high enough for the scholarship track, high enough that my mother cried into the phone and my father asked me, very softly, if I wanted him to put my exam photo back on the wall. I told him yes, but not the old one. The old one belonged to the girl who waited for permission to survive. Vivian tried to speak to me once more before she left campus. It happened behind the gymnasium, where the buses idled for weekend departures and fallen jacaranda flowers stuck purple and bruised to the wet pavement. She wore civilian clothes, which made her look smaller, though not softer. "You destroyed everyone to get ahead," she said. I had expected anger, maybe tears, maybe one final performance of innocence. Instead, she sounded tired. That almost made her more dangerous. "No," I said. "I stopped letting you hide inside everyone." She laughed without humor. "You think they'll thank you?" I looked toward the main gate, where students passed under the academy arch in little clusters, some avoiding my eyes, some watching me like a ghost story made flesh. "I don't need them to." Her expression twisted. "Then what did you want?" It was a good question. In my first life, I would have said justice. Revenge. My name cleared. Her life ruined. But standing there with my admission result folded in my pocket, I realized those answers were smaller than the truth. "I wanted to enter the room," I said. "That's all." She stared at me as if that was impossible, as if nobody could want something so simple after being handed a knife by fate. She left without another word.
No dramatic collapse. No confessions shouted beneath storm clouds.
Just Vivian walking toward a black car while her mother cried quietly beside the open door, and her uncle refused to look at anyone. Some endings do not roar. Some simply remove a person from the place where they used to control the air. After she disappeared through the gate, I stood alone under the jacaranda tree and let the campus noise return to normal around me. A basketball bounced somewhere inside the gym. A first-year student laughed too loudly near the vending machines. The chapel clock struck 4, each bell clear and ordinary. In another life, That sound would have made me flinch, because every bell reminded me of closing gates. This time, I counted them. 1 for the morning I survived. 1 for the afternoon I chose. 1 for the girl I had been, who trusted the wrong plan because loneliness had made her obedient. 1 for the woman I might become, who knew that walking alone was not the same as being lost. Years later, when younger students asked me about the Crownbridge Gate scandal, they always wanted the dramatic version. They wanted to hear that I exposed Vivian with a hidden recorder, that I marched into the boardroom with evidence, that I smiled while the whole cohort fell. They wanted revenge to look cinematic because cinematic revenge feels clean.
I never gave them that story.
I told them the truth. I read the official notice, changed my session through the proper office, kept my receipt, and refused to follow a girl who needed a crowd to make her lies feel safe. They were always disappointed at first. Then I would see the smarter ones glance down at their own forms, their own tickets, their own instructions, and understand. Fate rarely announces itself with lightning. Sometimes it arrives as a line on a form that everyone else ignores. Sometimes survival is not brave or glamorous. Sometimes it is standing at a counter while your hands shake, asking to move to the afternoon session, and letting the morning plan march away without you.